want to talk to you today about why we love our children. Not if, but why. Our Torah portion, Toldot, is a story about sibling rivalry, about parental favoritism, about deception, and the favoritism really stands out. So you see, one of my favorite verses to talk about in the whole Torah is that Ve'ahav Yitzchak et Esav ki tzayid befiv, that Isaac loved Esau because he gave him food. V'Rivka ohevet et Yaakov, and Rebekah loves Jacob. So loved Esau, loves Jacob. So you see that Isaac loves Esau because of who he is. That Isaac loves Esau, for what he brings him. He brings him food. Rebekah loves Jacob simply because of who he is. There's nothing about, not what he does, but just himself. And so think about how favoritism might make a child feel. And, how inadequacy or worthlessness, and think about in this story which characteristics are valued. Jacob is quiet, he's contemplative. Esau is outdoorsy, he's active. And now, by the way, our tradition clearly favors the indoors over the outdoors. But what you see is that in the end, Jacob is the one who through guile, who through trickery gets the blessing. And Esau lets off a great and bitter cry when he finds out what happens. He is always a step behind his brother, trading his birthright for a pot of lentil soup, and then his brother sneaks in and gets the blessing ahead of him. But there's always this backdrop of Rebekah maneuvering to favor Jacob over Esau. And there is always Isaac who favors Esau, but in the context of what Esau is bringing him. And when I think about this story, I think about it as why or how we value people, in particular, why or how we value our children. And so, for example, Judaism, we are the people of the book, and we also value intelligence above all else. So I am watching the college admissions process unfold this year. And, so Esau lets off a great and bitter cry in our Torah portion. And that is exactly, across the state of Georgia, there were those who celebrated and there were those who let forth their great or bitter cry as just moments before Shabbat, the early acceptances to UGA were announced. And I happen to be involved in college admissions myself. So my contract says that once a month I'm allowed to remind everyone in the congregation that I went to Harvard. And so I actually interview for them, and I get to meet these incredibly accomplished young people. These kids have taken like 15 AP tests, and they have a cure for cancer under their belt, and they're a talented flautist, and just you name it. And it reminds me, though, I think a little bit, even so, they're trying to figure out what is going to impress me as I'm speaking with them. And I always think back to Jacob trying to be Esau, right? Don't try to pretend that you're the world's greatest swimmer. That's okay. You're great for who you are. You don't have to be even more amazing than you already are. And I think that parents, I think that our society plays into that because of how we express our values. So you'll hear people brag about what school their child went to, their child becoming a doctor or a lawyer, or was top of their class at this school or that school. Whereas, if, your child is a plumber, if your child is a server at a restaurant, you may not be, you have to, but you know what? They're a great kid. Why is being a doctor enough? I don't need any ifs, ands, or buts, but if your kid is a server at a restaurant, suddenly we need to explain. Why does it matter if you are a great daughter as long as you have a law degree? And so I would modify that a little bit and say that if you look at Isaac gets it sort of, right? Because he doesn't value his most accomplished child intellectually. Jacob is clearly the smarter of the two. But he values Esau because Esau brings home, if not the bacon, then at least the lamb. And so there are some parents who say, well, I don't value intelligence, but who's going to support me in my old age? So I think about that all the time, though, that, when you ask parents, I run a Mazel Tov class, which I'm offering again in December. And I ask these folks, these young people who are going to be parents, and I ask them, so what do you want your child to be when they grow up? And they list all kinds of things. And I'm like, well, is it important that your child is happy, right? Well, yes, I want my child to be successful, but how do you define that? There's the story of there's a neurosurgeon who calls a plumber in the middle of the night because his pipe is broken, and the plumber comes over, and it's $500 to fix the pipe, and the neurosurgeon says, I barely make that for doing a surgery. And the plumber said, neither did I when I was a neurosurgeon. When we emphasize intelligence or even financial accomplishment, when we put everything about how we feel about someone on where someone goes to school, I think that is not great. I think that is actually bad, right? Because there are those who believe that they can't live up to their parents' expectations, to society's expectations, and that can trigger inadequacy, depression, anxiety, and all kinds of harmful behavior. And I think it's not that we can't set expectations for our children. We need to. The question is, what are the expectations that really matter? And I think we have to make sure that we are loving, that we are valuing our children, not for what they do, but for who they are. Not for what they bring home, not for where they get in, but for really what they are about as individuals. Because actually, one of my colleagues suggests, if you think about it, Esau, even though Jacob is the hero of our story, Esau is the better person. He is the person, even after his brother takes both of his blessings, he shows generosity, he shows compassion. Despite his gruff and hairy exterior, he's really gentle. Being a hunter and an outdoorsman rather than a sage doesn't diminish his value as a person. He, in his own way, is as much a blessing as Jacob was. So Esau calls out in this moment of bitterness, Father, you gave your blessing to Esau. Have you no blessing for me? I think one of the challenges in life is to actually come up with the appropriate blessing for each person that we meet. That each of our children deserves a blessing from us, but we have to realize that the blessing that we want to give them may not be the blessing they need. That we have to realize that our child, who is a Vildachaya, who runs around, who is outspoken, those are traits that on their own are not bad. Those are traits that may serve that child so well when they find the right way to channel them. That the child who is introspective will become a blessing if they find the right way to channel their strengths. We saw at the end of the story that Esau really cared for his parents. He brought food to his father. When he saw that his mother was upset at the choice that he made in a spouse, he married another woman, right? So he took on an extra set of in-laws just to make his mom happy. That's years of therapy right there. But I would suggest to you that as we are in the season of college admissions, as we are in the season of parenting, as we're in the season of gathering, and even if we only gather and have Thanksgiving over Zoom, and everyone is comparing, who has a nicer, it used to be you would compare on Thanksgiving who drove up in a better car. Well, now it's, who has a better at-home camera. But that we can really think about, what are we valuing people for, whether it's our children or all the people in our lives, and let's make sure we are valuing people for the right things. That it is not for their accomplishments, but it's for their qualities and characteristics. It's not for their achievements, but for their effort, not for what they've done, but for who they are. Shabbat Shalom.